Okay, so welcome back. We're still working on the 69 Caprice, and I'm going to explain a little bit what we got going on. As you saw in the last video, we had to recover from some epoxy issues. Got the car back into epoxy and coated with sanding primer, as seen like here. It's all covered in sanding primer. I then went ahead and sanded the roof with my orbital block. Roof was in nice shape for the most part, and with a big flat area like this, the orbital block, which also has, if you can see here, this is the block that comes on the sander. I made a longer block with my own fiberglass board, which is also rigid and smooth and gives a absolutely straight cut. The pads on these sanders always have like a foam or a rubber, which have a tendency to give, which is okay. But when you want to sand something flat, you want a nice, rigid, flat surface on your machines or your blocks or whatever the case. So I went over the roof, and there was some spots up in the front of the roof here that require a little bit of plastic work. And the sail panels right along here were a little wavy, so that got a little bit of plastic work too. Nothing too outrageous, about a day's work to do that. Then this morning I came in and bagged it up and threw 3 more wet coats of primer on it, and one of the things I found out epoxying this car and priming this car is it's not easy to do, because to stand on each side of this car and reach across this roof isn't easy. So what I'm doing is I'm getting the roof prepped to the point where I'm going to paint that first. I'm going to go from somewhere down here in the pillar, up the post, inside here, break it off at the sail panel, and also break it off along the back window. And I'm going to do this first on its own. So it's going to be easier to reach. I won't have to be worrying about leaning into the quarter panels when I'm trying to reach across the roof. Plus, about the time I'm planning on having this roof painted and cleared, I should be getting the fenders and doors and such back from the sandblaster and get those parts into epoxy and into sanding primer. And that'll give the roof, the clear coat essentially on the roof, time to cure so that when I have to continue doing whatever I'm doing on the rest of the car at that point, it'll be hard enough and safe enough to put tape on. If you put tape on clear that's too fresh, you will leave marks, and you'll see exactly where you taped it. Now, the quarters, I started blocking. I started with the orbital block and went across the outside of the quarters, because it works. Down here on the lower half, these quarters have a very weird shape to them. They bubble out, and they have a lot of weird shapes in them. So I won't be able to utilize the air block for that. This will all be doing by hand. But as you can see by the light spots and the dark spots, the dark spots are obviously the low spots, and that's going to require some little bit of filler. Again, this is the kind of filler work I'm talking about that these cars get. The car isn't made out of filler, but it's fixed with filler to get these imperfections straightened out. And here, as you can see, and something I've learned is I'm just doing one section of the quarter at a time to maintain the build and the definition of this center body line. Fortunately, there's a piece of trim that goes right to the body line, so really at the end of the day, no one's ever going to see it. But you're going to see it once the car is painted, before the trim goes on. So, you know, you still want it to look nice and perfect and straight and the way it should be. Just because a piece of trim's hiding something doesn't mean you should cut corners and cheap out. So what I start with is defining where the line is, and then I'll go ahead and I will get a straight edge and use a straight edge to make a straight pencil line from front to back. I've tried it with just using tape, and your tape will wander. So start off with a good straight edge, and what I normally do is measure down same distance on each of these molding holes and make a mark, and then, you know, run a straight line. And then I put a couple rows of tape there so that I'm only putting plastic on the top half and sanding on the top half, so I don't lose where my line is. Everybody has little different techniques. This is a technique I've been using, and it seems to work pretty well. I can get pretty nice sharp lines in the bodies. So the primer was just put on this morning. That needs at least 24 hours to cure. This is a pretty wet application. Wet meaning I reduced the primer down according to spec, but as wet as I could make it so that it would flow out, it would lay flat, and that when I sand it, I can sand this with 320 or 400 before I put my sealer coat down. But since this is nice and wet and has flowed out and was laid over a nicely sanded, I mean, most of this was sanded with like 220, so it flowed out pretty nice, laid down pretty nice, and now it'll be that much easier to sand. It was pretty jagged when I sanded it from the stripping phase with the aggressive sanding tools, the grinder and the 8-inch sander and all that. It really, there was a lot of saw marks that I had to sand pretty far till they were all out. But that's why you put this many coats on, to get those things, those problems fixed. So now it's nice and smooth. It'll sand nice and even, nice and smooth. It won't take a whole lot to get this ready. And in the meantime, I'm just going to keep going on these quarters, get some plastic on these. I'll go now that, I mean, these spots here aren't sanded because they're obviously low, so the block isn't hitting them. So what I go ahead and I go around and put pencil lines around all my areas that are going to require plastic. The pencil lines are going to tell me where to put the plastic, because after I put the pencil lines on, I have to sand these areas a little bit to get mechanical adhesion with the plastic. So the pencil lines are going to tell me where the plastic needs to go, because once I sand the primer, they kind of disappear and you won't be able to see them as well. Doing the same thing obviously over on this side. Like I said, concentrate on, like I'm doing this, both tops of the quarters on both sides of the car at the same time. One of the reasons I do that is to kind of do a little bit of work on this side, and then when I have to recoat or something like that, I'll go to the other side. But if you try and do too many areas at one time, that's where you kind of lose where you're at, and it's hard to keep. Meaning you may end up forgetting something or missing something or what have you if you're trying to concentrate on too many areas at one time. So focus on just a few areas to guarantee that you're gonna make sure everything is done correctly and all the way through. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started on this, see how it goes. All right, so I marked across the quarter here and there, and then in this area up in the front here, there was just too many spots. It was just really wavy and highs and lows and all kinds of whatnot, so that just constituted covering the whole area. This area wasn't as bad back here, and then when you get over to this side, you can see that this quarter I mentioned earlier is the one that's going to need some more attention. Again, it's not body filler like this tends to look bad and give a, you know, everybody has that Bondo bucket term that they use when they see Bondo on a car, or body filler as I call it. But as I've always said in the past, to anybody who looks at something like this, only maybe 40 to 50% of this will be left on here, and other people in the past will say to block a panel, reprime it, block it again, reprime it. Well, you could be doing that till doomsday. You get so far, and this step here, putting the filler on like this, is just jumping ahead, you know, adding that much at one time. You can't do that with a, you know, you can make primer pretty thick and lay it on pretty thick, and it's kind of a dangerous thing to do. Kind of having shrinkage and things like that, and it can come back later on. So, you know, filling all your lows with filler is the faster way to get to where you need to go. But you'll see once I sand all of this how much of the car is going to be back again. You know, how you're not going to see all this color covering this entire spot. It's going to be, you know, shadows of the actual primer and metal and a little bit of the filler to take up those low spots. The tape line I still have. I'm going to put another line of tape underneath this edge, because when I start sanding I'll end up messing up the top edge, but I want to maintain this line, so I'll put another piece of tape underneath. That'll be safe, and then when I need to put another coat of filler on it, I can put a fresh piece of tape on it. But you also saw that I pulled a layer of tape off. You put 2 layers on here when you put your plastic on, so that when you put your plastic on, you can go right to it, and then once you're done spreading, pull that piece of tape off, and it cleans up the line really nice. If I pulled this piece of tape off right now, you'd have a nice straight, sharp edge where the filler ends, and again, that's what it's going to end up looking like in the long term. So that was a little bit of body filler basics. There's a lot to body filler that I could get into, mixing and so forth. All those little things are crucial. You know, again, I mixed a few boards because I don't like to mix giant boards of plastic, because again, doing too much is where you know, it just gets messy and you lose kind of where you're at. So I do about 200 grams of plastic. I mix it on a scale so that, again, you're mixing with your activator 100% correct. Because if you undermix it or overmix it. Either direction you go, you can cause future problems when this gets out into the sunlight and so forth. So you want to be pretty accurate on your mixing. So now I'm gonna start sanding all this. Probably take a few swipes. This left side quarter isn't nearly as bad as that right side quarter, so this one won't take as much time as that one does. But it's never done in one. You can't put it on so thick that you get it done in one shot. You make more of a mess trying to do that. Plus, like, I maintained the trim holes, try to keep the plastic out of those, because again, once you lose those and they get away from you, you know, some of them are easy to get to. They're inside the quarter, and some of them aren't. But usually on my first heavy pass, I work around them, and then if I end up needing more around where they are, I'll fill it in when there's only a little bit to fill in, because then you don't run the risk of filling it up with a lot of plastic. Plus, you don't want a lot of plastic build around the trim holes, because then the clips that snap into here, in this case, if it's too thick, they won't snap in right and hold the trim correctly. So you want to keep it to a minimum. So I'm going to get sanding and keep at it. So there's a little example of starting a panel with plastic work. I roughed it in with some 40 grit on my air file here. This has like a Velcro pad to it, and you can get so far with one of these, but when you're going for something absolutely straight, you have to finish it up with some kind of sanding block. Again, this is one of my homemade sanding block, rigid sanding blocks. I got a shorter one here for like this little cove area, which has a little bit of a dip to it. And these other smaller areas, that's a good block for. Usually the size of the panel determines the size of the block you want to use. I have a longer block than this one. It's actually 24 inches, I believe, long, with a full-size sheet of sandpaper. It's actually a sheet and a half, and I could be using that too. The airboard did the job to get this down, and now I'm getting to the point where I'm showing signs of metal, and I'm getting back down to the parent primer, you know, showing metal and different spots are coming through, which tells me that I need to coat this, put another skim coat on it. But the heavy fill is pretty much done, which again, it isn't that much. There's a pretty substantial low spot right here that I haven't even begun to sand. So that's a pretty significant spot. But again, because I have primer showing on each side of it, my block is basically bridging across it. So that's still very low. So normally what I'll do is the areas that show to be really shallow, I'll put a little bit of plastic on that by itself, re-sand that area, and then when I've got, you know, most of it kind of even, but needing that thin skim coat, that's when I'll coat again. I'll just put a skim coat on this entire panel, because it needs just a little bit. It just needs a little bit more just to get the edges smoothed off and just evened out. Again, it's not a lot of build, despite what it might look like. It's just a very thin, even coat, evening out all the highs and lows. So I'm just going to continue to work on this today and probably start the other side that I've shown earlier, get that going, and come tomorrow, I'm going to get back onto the roof, get this sanded out, and start getting some color on this. But this shows just, you know, what it takes to get these cars looking the way we make them look. It's not, again, it's not the brand of paint or the cost of the paint or whatever, or the paint that makes the car look good. It's these steps that get it to the point of making it look like a mirror and that show car finish. So, gonna get back to it. We got a long way to go here. We just started. So it's gonna get back to it. All right, well, there's phase one. Roof is all finished up. Painted and cleared it yesterday. 3.5 coats of base, 3 coats of clear yesterday. Gave it about 24 hours to flash. Sanded it all with 800 grit. Got it down relatively flat again. And put 3 more coats on today. And in the meantime, I had done some more plastic work on the quarters. This is probably the final swipe on this side. Minus a couple little spots, and this on the right side. Other than those few little spots, this section's pretty much done. So pretty productive week. Got the doors and the parts all back from sandblasting. And that's what's coming up next. But here's the roof. And doing the roof all by itself before trying to paint the entire car and the roof at the same time, this was definitely a good idea. Sometimes I have good ideas because it took a lot of stretching to be able to reach across this roof. Minus, not falling into it while trying to do it. But overall, I think it turned out really nice. So, until the next video, as always, thanks for watching. Click the like button, thumbs up, whatever you call it. Leave a comment, subscribe, all those YouTube things that YouTube people do. And we'll see you next time.